when the Midianites are oppressing Israel in the Old Testament, and Gideon is they're taxing Israel. I think they were taxing Israel some enormous amount. Gideon um, rolled out the wheat and separated the wheat from the chaff on the wine press so that he would not have to pay as high of a tax to the Midianites. So
Hmm.
the question is like, is that lying? Is that like where does that fall? Is that what's the ethics of that?
Yeah, that's a great question. There's a lot packed in there.
Yeah, sorry.
Um, so this question about whether important figures in the Old Testament, especially, but also in one place in the New Testament, whether they lied, right, is something that really bothers Augustine and Aquinas, right? They both think that they need to excuse biblical figures from the accusation of lying. So they're very
Mm,
concerned, for instance, about Abraham saying that Sarah is his
right,
cousin rather than his wife.
right.
Um, and their view, they're both of them. I mean, they both agree on this. Well, it's true, right? She was. So it's misleading, but it's not a lie. And the one New Testament thing, and well, I mean, so they both talk about the Egyptian midwives
Hmm.
lying to Pharaoh,
Yeah,
and they both say in that case they want to say who were and who were given a reward by God. They say,
right.
well, they did lie. They lied out of a good motive, and they were rewarded for the good motive, but their reward was only an earthly reward because what they did was also wrong, right? So they've got, they
Mm,
think that they need to address this. There is a question about Jesus, when he makes as if to go on um, further on the road to Emmaus. Is that a lie? I think both Augustine and Aquinas would say no because it doesn't actually involve an assertion. Right. So, but this is there's an interpretive question about the Bible. If you think that lying is always wrong, how far do you have to go in order to exculpate various people from this? And then there is also, I think you're absolutely correct to put your finger on this. There is a puzzle because both Augustine and Aquinas make a distinction between what is permissible to private persons in the domain of killing and what's
hmm.
permissible to those with civil authority. And both take it to be the case that it's permissible for those with civil authority to intend death, right? For instance, in execution.
Right.
Both hold that it is always wrong for a private person under any circumstance to intend death of anybody, right?
Hmm.
So Augustine seems to be denying that you can even use force if it might be lethal in order to protect your life if you're under unjust assault.
Mm.
And Aquinas introduces, I mean, this is a little bit in the weeds, but I think it's an important,
Yeah, go
they're
ahead.
important weeds. Aquinas says, no, what Augustine is saying is that you can't intend death to the person who's attacking you. But it's permissible to use force to repel that person, even if you foresee that as a side effect, death might come to that person,
Right.
right? And so Aquinas thinks that in the realm of private persons, the only lethal force that's permissible is lethal force that happens as a side effect.
Yeah.
But
Interesting.
he thinks that for people with public authority, right, it doesn't have to be a side effect, right? They can choose to kill, right? And that capital when people are carrying out a capital sentence, they are choosing to kill, and when people are going to war, they're choosing to kill. And
Yeah.
I think that raises a puzzle. I'm really sorry. As I mentioned by email, I first came down with laryngitis, but it was only so that I could then get a cold.
Very sorry. No, you're totally fine.
They have this interestingly divided view, and it raises a puzzle. I think it raises a couple of different puzzles. And one is, well, if they think this about killing, why don't they also think this about lying? Why
Mm.
don't they think that public authorities have authority to lie? Maybe private persons don't, right? But why not think that since public authority have authority to kill, that they
Right.
also have authority to lie?
Yeah.
Um, I think so I won't say I'll say just two things about this, right? One is that I think that their reasons ultimately are for not making that distinction are biblical, right? That they think that it's just obvious. And they take this from Paul, right? St. Paul says this, that God doesn't lie,
Right.
and that the model for civil authority and what it is allowed to do that differentiates it from private persons is a biblical model, right?
Mm.
That if there's something that God just doesn't do, right, then that's not something that we should claim as special for civil authority,
Yeah.
right? And so I think that's a deep part of their thinking about why there isn't this special. I mean, because on the surface of it, although I think this could be qualified in a variety of different ways, on the surface of it, it does look like God kills, um, right?
Right.
But it doesn't look like, but they're committed to the view that God never lies. Right.
Right.
Now, so that's the first thing I'd say is, right, why don't they draw this distinction? And because it just seems clear to them that that's not something that God does, and so civil authority can't inherit that kind of authority from God in the way that it looks like civil authority can inherit the authority to kill.
Hmm.
Um, just as a kind of side note, I will say that I have my own additional doubts about that way that Augustine and Aquinas divide things, even with regard to killing, right?
Mm.
And you could see, I think it's a kind of unstable distinction. I think you see the instability. I think most Christians think, for instance, that if I am attacking you, right, that you can use lethal force in response and intend to kill me,
Right.
right? I think that's become the standard view because of this instability of thinking that private persons can't do it, but public people with public authority can.
Mm.
But I think actually the instability should be resolved in the other direction. Um, just as it's wrong for both private persons and persons with public authority to lie, I think it is also wrong for private persons and people with public authority to intend death, and that the only permissible killing is killing that happens as a side effect. And I'll just say that 9 months, 10 months from now, I'm hoping that the sequel to Lying and Christian Ethics will come out with the same press, with Cambridge University Press, and it's called Killing in Christian Ethics.
Got
Uh,
it.
and that's
Okay.
where I make that argument.
Yeah, there you go. Okay, so let's unpack that final bit.
Sure.
The lying is not permissible both in private and in public persons, and this is like across the board,
No.
never permissible. Um, do you make any distinctions? So I think you brought up in the book the situation of German people who were hiding Jews from the Nazis, and the Nazi asks like, do you have Jews in your house? Do you have Jews under the floorboard, under the couch,
Yep.
right? And I don't. What were your kind of your thoughts around that, and did anything change in time of war?
Yeah. So there's a difference. I think it's important to see the narrow claim that I'm making, which is that it's always wrong to lie, right? And that's different from saying that you should always tell the truth, right? There's
Mm.
lots of circumstances in which it is true both that you shouldn't lie and that it would be wrong for you to reveal the truth to somebody, right? You've
Right.
promised to keep something secret. Well, you can't lie about it if I'm right
Yeah.
about lying, but you've also promised to keep it secret, so you shouldn't just go blabbing, right, the truth.
Yeah.
And so I think, I mean, my answer, which is not a perfect answer because there is no perfect answer when you're dealing with Nazis, right, who are notoriously unreasonable and wicked.
Yep.
Um, my answer is that anytime a Nazi asks you a question about whether you're hiding Jews, right, you have an authority, you have an obligation not to tell them the truth, right? They
Hmm.
have no genuine authority with regard to you, and there are good reasons, I think. And I think had everybody thought this, then things might have been different to some extent, and maybe to a great extent in Germany. There are good reasons to resist the authority, the claims to authority that Nazis made. And one way that you do that is by saying, "Look, I'm just not going to answer that question, right? I whether I do or whether I don't answer questions about whether I'm hiding Jews from people who are unjustly seeking them.
Yeah.
No, things might have gone bad for you, right? You probably at least would have been, knocked around a bit, and then they would have
Yeah.
searched your house. And let's
They would
say
have
that you,
probably assumed that you had Jews based off that answer.
that's right. And then so let's assume that they knock you around a little bit and search your house, and you're not, and this is your principle, right? This is what you say every time. So they've maybe come 2 or 3 times and done this, and each time
Right.
they haven't found anybody, and they now just think of that you're a troublemaker. And so when you say it the third or fourth time, maybe they just knock you around and don't bother to search because they've been through this routine before, and maybe this is the time that you are hiding Jews in your basement.
Hmm.
Um, I think that is a way of adopting a particular strategy of both political protest and not lying that covers not just times that you're hiding Jews in the basement, but also times that you're not hiding Jews in the basement. Is it perfect? No, right? But of
Mm,
course,
yeah.
people who lied, right, also were not adopting a perfect approach because Nazis don't believe
Right.
people, right?
Yeah.
And so they're likely to search your house, even if you're lying to them when you're hiding Jews, and bad consequences will ensue. So I think it's
Right.
important to find a principled approach
Yeah.
um, that maybe in some cases will also bear some good fruit, but that you know manages to uphold what you think is genuinely morally true.